Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our second Entrepreneur Speaker Series of the semester. I am Shanika Turner. I am an assistant professor of business administration here at Georgia Highlands College, and I will be the moderator for this series. As you notice, you are on mute, but please feel free at any time to post questions to the chat. And after our speaker is done speaking, I will make sure all those questions get asked. Um, so today I just want to, we are going to be talking to a wonderful entrepreneur, and there is a common misconception that if employees become more entrepreneurial, they will leave the company and potentially become rivals. But in actuality, many people prefer to be entrepreneurs in their career. Having entrepreneurial minded employees on your team can actually yield wonderful results never imagined. Results such as unmatched ability to multitask, increased momentum for self-starting, heightened creativity to solve problems, thinking outside of the box on all new projects, and creating the most innovative new products and services. So please do not think that you cannot be an innovator in your field and in your career, because you can. Our speaker is someone who is making a difference not only in her career, but in her community as well. Becky Gabany is the System Director of Community Health for Memorial Health Systems in Springfield, Illinois. Memorial Health Systems is a comprehensive system of healthcare, which includes 5 hospitals and a range of outpatient services and specialty clinics. In this capacity, Becky is responsible for community benefit programs at Memorial Medical Center and provides support in those areas for the affiliates of Memorial Health System. She is also interim leading equity, diversity, and inclusion work for the health system, a new function started in response to the murder of George Floyd and the stark health disparities highlighted with the COVID-19 pandemic. Becky is a lifelong resident of the Springfield, Illinois area, receiving her master's in human services at the University of Illinois at Springfield. Becky serves on many community committees, boards, and impact groups, such as the United Way Health Vision Council and the Boys and Girls Clubs of Central Illinois Board of Directors. She lives with her husband, Adam, and their 2 sons, Julie and Arlo. Becky is an avid reader, thrift shopper, and traveler. She has visited 19 countries. Becky has a passion for equity and a desire to learn, grow, and act as an ally for those who are marginalized. She believes that entrepreneurship comes in many forms and encourages others to look within their circles of control to effect change. So without further ado, I want to welcome Becky to the virtual floor.
Thank you so much, Shanika. I am so excited to be here today, and I have loved the challenge that this putting together this presentation has given me, because I have really not thought of myself in the past as an entrepreneur, but I'm definitely thinking a little differently of that now. So I actually put together some slides for today, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, are you able to see that? Is that coming across?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So my presentation today is going to be about entrepreneurship, leadership, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. I work for Memorial Health System, and so I'm going to be sharing a bit about my journey through the health system, as well as my personal kind of learning that has been going on. So Shanika introduced me with many things that I was going to share, and so I appreciate her doing that. But I want to give some context for the presentation today. So I want to tell a little more about myself, a little more about where I come from and my home, and then a little bit more about where I work. So I am a white, straight, cisgender, able-bodied woman. Like Shanika said, I am married, I'm a parent, I'm also a first generation college student. And I should also mention that my undergraduate degree was in communications with a minor in sociology. So I'm starting to see threads too of entrepreneurship and kind of identifying different gaps that would be there for my education, and then kind of shifting degrees, depending on what I felt like those gaps were. My parents are both entrepreneurs. They have been self-employed and business owners, small business owners, my entire life and my whole upbringing, which has been kind of interesting for me because I consider myself a little adverse to entrepreneurship in the traditional sense, because while I like to push boundaries and take some risks, kind of being a business owner has always felt like more risk than I was necessarily willing to take on. So again, that has given me a lot of food for thought. And so with all of that, I also want to point out that I am very privileged in many, many ways. And so we'll talk kind of more about how that plays out in my work as we go. I am born and raised in Springfield, Illinois, which is the state capital of Illinois. It's a very political kind of town by virtue of having the capital in it, but it is predominantly white, conservative, and Christian. And there's a couple of nuances to our community that I think are important for everyone to know and understand. And one is that in a recent study done, or a survey done through our Citizens Club, residents of Springfield noted that connections really, really matter for your economic success here in Springfield and Sangamon County. Springfield was also, or is also, the town that the NAACP was founded in, and that was founded as a response to the 1908 race riots. The events are called the 1908 race riots historically, but we also want to point out that those were not riots between the races. That was violence perpetuated by white community members against Black community members because of their race. So that was a foundational part of our community and of the NAACP starting, and then ultimately later having national chapters. Present day, we see that history play out in many ways. We have a very segregated community. There's train tracks literally through the middle of town. And on one side is the more affluent, predominantly white members of our community. And on the other side of the tracks are the under-resourced neighborhoods, and predominantly Black and people of color living within those neighborhoods. Within Springfield specifically, we have the worst disparity between Black and white median household incomes of any metro area in the entire country. So we're a fairly small town, but that's a pretty powerful, in a negative sense, statistic. But I think it's important to have that context for what our community is like. So additionally, for my work, I work for Memorial Health System, and Shanika introduced bits of that. We have approximately 1,000 licensed beds, and we are in 5 different counties with hospitals, but we have a 16-county service area. We employ over 8,500 colleagues, and of those colleagues, 88% are white and 80% are female. So I am an avid reader, as was mentioned, and I want to talk just for a second about Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. This is an older book, and I'm assuming several people have probably read it, but if not, I'm going to recommend. It's a great one. So in his book, and as I thought through this presentation, there were many threads that I noticed from this book. But one is these 3 different roles that he lines out that help affect change. And one of those roles is connectors. And this is something that I have really deeply identified with ever since reading this book, is kind of knowing and having a larger social network, by virtue of being born and raised here in Springfield, but then always being in the habit of making those introductions and connecting all of these pieces together. The subheading for his book is how little things can make a big difference. And I think in the context of entrepreneurship, that's really important to think about what are the small gaps that we can identify in our work or in our business or in thinking of starting a business. What are those little things that actually have a really big impact? So I would encourage everyone, if you've read this book, to be kind of thinking through that as I talk here. And if you haven't, it's a great one to pick up. Okay, so on this slide, this kind of outlines my career trajectory at Memorial. So I started as the secretary within their childcare center, which is essentially a daycare. And then I moved on to a coordinator position with hospice volunteers. And then I had a pretty sizable jump in career kind of role and title from a coordinator to a director. And then my position evolved into being the system director of community health and took on some new responsibilities within there. So I also want to call out, I talked earlier about some of the different aspects of my identity and some of the privileges that I hold. And I want to be clear that while I have worked hard and, I try to produce quality work, I have also had a very successful career trajectory in a short amount of time, largely in part to many of my privileges and having that kind of access and connections and things like that. As I think through, entrepreneurship and in what ways I've been entrepreneurs in these roles, I came across one of many definitions on Google, and I've got it here on the screen. It says, entrepreneurs play a key role using the skills and initiative necessary to anticipate needs and bring good new ideas to their work. So I highlighted initiative and anticipated needs, and those are the two areas that I think I connected most with here. Of each position I've been in, I've tried to be proactive about saying, okay, this is the work I'm supposed to be doing, but what more needs done here? What are things that we're missing here? What are things that would add to and make this better? And anticipating those needs and then putting those into action before someone asks me to do so. In my current role now as the system director of community health, I am leading work around community health needs assessments that are led by the community. And then we build implementation plans around what the community says that they would like us to be working on. So that gives some kind of context for that community engagement work as we talk about our equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. So before I go on, I want to make sure that we are defining equity, diversity, and inclusion. So many people hear these and kind of hear them as buzzwords, but I want to make sure that we kind of level set before moving forward. So you'll see many places refer to this work as diversity, equity, and inclusion. With healthcare, you'll often see equity used first, and that is due to the focus on equity and health outcomes. So we often center that word first. But essentially, diversity is all of the unique dimensions that make us us, and that make us different or similar to other folks. So in my introduction, I talked about being a straight, cisgender, able-bodied woman, a parent. Those are all dimensions of diversity that make me similar or different from other people who I'm in community with. The idea of equity is the concept of giving folks what they need in order to be successful when they need it. And so this is different than equality in that equality is giving everyone the same thing and expecting them to be successful. So probably my favorite analogy around this is the idea of a family taking a bike ride together. So if you have a bicycle that is a frame fitted for a 6-foot-tall man, maybe dad can take that bike ride. He's the tallest one in the family and he can go ride around the neighborhood. But mom, and I'm going to use just kind of a male-female marriage family structure for this example, but mom is maybe 5 foot tall and it would be really hard for her to ride a 6-foot-tall bicycle. And then if you had a 5-year-old child, they would not be able to ride the 6-foot framed bicycle. And if you had a grandma who had mobility issues, she also would be excluded from being able to do that family bike ride. However, if you came from an equity mindset and gave everyone what they need in order to be successful, and dad had a 6-foot framed bike, mom had a bike framed for someone who's 5 foot, grandma had an accommodation like a tricycle, and the 5-year-old had training wheels, then the entire family could take a bike ride around the neighborhood together. And then the idea of inclusion is really making space where folks can fully be themselves, and be included in the power, the distribution of power, and have a voice in the decision making and the planning, and really contributing to an organizational culture that includes all people and really values and respects the dignity of all of those differences, of diversity. So as I moved through different roles, I started to notice gaps in EDI competency. So starting with volunteer services, I recognized that our roster really was not very diverse, and I wanted to change that. And so I started seeking how to do so. And I very quickly noticed and recognized that I had a lot of deficiencies in my personal knowledge around diversity, and inclusion. So as I dug in and tried to educate myself, among those ways, as I worked more in the community engagement space, I started to recognize that many of the leaders around me also had gaps in these competencies. And I was recognizing things that I was learning on my own, that I wasn't seeing that knowledge kind of distributed elsewhere among my peers. And then as we moved kind of farther into EDI, and I'm going to talk through what that looked like, but it became apparent that as an institution, we really didn't have a framework to support, let alone advance, equity work throughout our healthcare system and our community. So this inverted pyramid helps display how we got to having a formal structure for EDI at Memorial. And I talked about that personal foundational knowledge just a second ago. And it really started there of me saying, okay, I've got to learn, there is a gap here, and I'm going to take that initiative to learn this. Otherwise, I'm not going to be effective long-term in my role, and I'm not going to be able to give the community what they need. And I'm not going to be able to engage in a meaningful way that doesn't cause more harm than good. So as I was on that kind of personal journey, some other context was going on, or came along after. And context is another thing that Malcolm Gladwell talks extensively about in The Tipping Point, which is kind of all these things that happen around us. And when you bring those folks together, it results in big change. So the context I'm talking about here is, well into the pandemic, we started noticing there were severe health disparities amongst COVID-19 and deaths, and who had access to healthcare and things like that. And predominantly people of color were being negatively affected. So there was a lot of kind of pondering this, and I recognize those disparities have been around forever and for a very long time, but many of us were not paying attention to that. And so we started to see that. Additionally, in context of the time, there was the murder of George Floyd, also Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and there was a lot of soul searching that started. And so I think with any kind of big change, there's always a bit of disruption that comes along. And for me, I made a very conscious decision at that point that if I had built up this social capital and I had all of these privileges and have been embedded and trusted in this organization, if I wasn't going to try to make change in this moment, then when will I? And if I'm not going to use all of those benefits, for a cause that is meaningful, what really are my personal values? So there was a lot of talk around that. And really at that point, I started kind of pushing more of those boundaries at work and asking questions and trying to tie in equity much more explicitly to the work I was doing with our community benefit work. So through this, a lot of conversations started happening throughout the institution, and not just with me, but many other people started speaking up and coming together and saying, hey, we want to do better here. So that ultimately led to consensus building and led to a lot of interest in doing more, in learning and growing, which led to us launching a book club. And I say that with a little grain of salt, in that I understand that's oftentimes kind of a predominant white institution response for equity is, well, let's have a book club. So the book club was very successful, and it's absolutely what we needed at that moment in our journey. But we did make sure that book club grew into a more formal commitment as well. But that really helped bring in engagement, and it started giving us other opportunities to bring folks into the conversation and to help others lean in. And through that, we were able to make an organizational commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion work. So our organization development team started working on how could we restructure certain divisions, how could we bring some of this work together in a more formal way. And then ultimately, I started leading this work for the health system over the last year in the interim as we established more of a formal structure and a leadership model and things like that. So all of this to say, and I'm going to talk about the structure in a second, but all of this to say that you have to start somewhere. And I'm using a specific example of EDI, but this can look similarly for other entrepreneurship opportunities, and that you've got that foundational kind of personal connection, and that you're learning and you're identifying gaps and you're plugging that in where it's most needed and most valuable and fulfilling. So we have a formal structure now. So we went from having literally no infrastructure around EDI, and we now have a division. So we have a vice president of EDI who will actually be announced here in the next couple of weeks. So I can't share that yet, but I am thrilled to have that role filled. We also have EDI consultants, language access services. You see my role there for community health. And then we have folks who are engaged in that community health work for each of our communities. So in the first 6 months of EDI, we were working on standing up this work and building a team. We had a lot of accomplishments and a lot of that engagement work happen, and much of this I'm very proud of. So one is that we established a coalition development team. This is a cross-section of individuals of different identities and roles within the health system who are helping drive EDI forward for our organization. We had several people participate in a Crossroads anti-racism training. We have engaged in several different pledges and equity pilot projects that are structured to really make a big impact in the areas that they focus on. And one of my favorite things is we won we received the Phoenix Center Community Partner with Pride Award. The Phoenix Center is an organization that helps LGBTQ individuals here within our central Illinois communities. So we were really excited about having this work start and all of the ways that people were able to get involved and engage. So through this work, some of the key lessons I've learned that specifically have to do with equity work, but I think are applicable in many other situations as well, are listed here. And so first is humility, curiosity, and accountability. And I say this all the time, but you cannot be doing this work without those three things. And honestly, to be a good leader, you should be also, employing those three ideas as well. Strong opinions are not the same as informed knowledge. I have learned over and over again, there's many things that I feel like are these firmly held beliefs or understandings, and I'm constantly re-educated to learn like, oh, wait, no, that's completely different than I thought. It's also important to understand that impact is more important to focus on than intent. I can be a well-meaning white woman all day long, but if my work ultimately causes more harm for communities who are marginalized, then that's not okay. And so constantly looking at that intent versus impact. Never underestimating the power of trauma and recognizing how trauma manifests and shows up in our interactions with each other. Recognizing that I don't have to have all the answers and I'm going to make mistakes, but I've got to start somewhere. And when I make those mistakes, I've got to use those as learning opportunities and stay in the work and keep leaning in and keep doing the work. With that recognition of starting somewhere, people who have been marginalized, and particularly people of color, have been doing this work for years. So I'm not the expert. I'm not coming up with anything new. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. It's my role to really listen and learn, and then take that learning and apply it within the circles of control that I have. Intersectionality has to be central to equity work. So all of those different identities that I listed earlier, they all interplay together. And those advantages and disadvantages affect folks in many different aspects of our society. And so just being really intentional about understanding those intersections and how they may be at play is important. And then finally, I get to decide if I want to be an ally or accomplice, but other people, those who are marginalized, get to decide if I am an ally or accomplice. So again, this goes back to that accountability piece of who are we accountable to. I also want to talk about anti-racism, which could also interchangeably be called anti-oppression. And so these are some of the core concepts from that. And I've partially taken these from the Crossroads Anti-Racism Training, which is a national program. And I recommend anyone who's able to participate in that to do so. But always consider who is present and who is being left out. And I think as we are entrepreneurs, it's important to think of ourselves as any of these spaces that we're in, we can be building equity and should be building equity into. So always thinking about who is present here, who's being left out, who am I drawing in to the work that I'm doing, and who am I excluding? And it reminds me of the phrase, nothing about us without us. So who is it that we're trying to serve? Who is it that we're making decisions about? And are they here and a part of that decision making? Holding space for two truths at once is what we like to call both and. And so I talked earlier about how I both work hard and try to produce quality work, and my privileges have really helped launch my career in ways that other people would not maybe have that access. So always recognizing that there can be multiple truths kind of playing out together. It is a must to be collaborative and transparent in this work, and also to be abundance minded. So I like to consider this as how will we get something done, not if we'll get something done. And that when we think of resources differently, there's a lot of ways to make things happen. And then always learning and growing and recognizing that anti-oppression work is a journey, and it's not something that will be, there's not a checklist or a box or I'm going to say the right things and be fine. It's always about learning and growing and challenging our assumptions and seeing, who ultimately is being pushed out to the margins and who is not. So I talked earlier about how there was a fairly sizable jump from my role as a coordinator to my role as a director. And when I had the opportunity to make that move, my boss at the time, he has since retired and is a very dear friend now, but he took a lot of time to really mentor me through that change and to give me some of the leadership principles that had helped throughout his career. And so I certainly employ these things all the time in my leadership roles or my equity work or just in my relationships with people and friends. So I wanted to share a few of my favorites here today. So first things first, build relationships. You cannot be effective. You can't be an effective entrepreneur. You can't be an effective visionary. You can't be effective at any kind of work unless you're building those relationships first and really centering those as a priority. You have to make explicit to others what seems implicit to you. So it might seem like common sense, but common sense isn't always common. And this is one that I struggle with all the time, is kind of trying to help explain what's in my mind or the knowledge that I have about something. So that's always a struggle for myself. It's my job to create the environment that other people want to be in. So this could be your work, this could be your friends, could be your classrooms, but it's our job to create that inclusive environment. Never ask someone to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. So having that respect for others, the same that you do for your own self. Always foster intellectual curiosity. Always be a learner, a lifelong learner. I know that might seem a little overwhelming when finals week comes around and you're like, I don't ever want to read a book again. But it's always important to keep fostering that curiosity. Under promise and over deliver. And I love this one. So think of what you could likely accomplish. And when you're setting expectations for folks, set those expectations a little under that and always strive to go over that. And that will serve you very well throughout your career and your working with other folks, in your spaces. Admit when you don't know. It's okay to not know. and always take less credit for the team's successes and more blame for the team's failures. And then finally, I'm telling myself a story. This is a technique that is used. It comes from Crucial Conversations. If you're ever able to take that class, it's a great one. But this is a tool to help us explain the way we're feeling or our perception to others in a way that creates safety in that conversation. So I'm telling myself, when you do this, I'm telling myself a story that you don't like me or something like that. And then it opens up the opportunity for someone else to say, oh no, that story is incorrect. Like this is what I was trying to do. So that's a technique I always encourage others to use as well. And finally, this is my last slide here, but I have been so fortunate to have so many people mentor me, especially through diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And these are some of the resources and references that have been really helpful in shaping my understanding of some of this work. And particularly under local experts, many women of color in particular have really guided me and lifted me up in this work and helped me as I was trying to learn and do better. And I'm forever grateful for them and their knowledge and their commitment to this work, because many of these folks have been doing this work for decades, and I'm kind of newly stepping in. As a reader, there's been several books that have been really foundational for me. These are three of the books that probably had the largest impact in expanding my understanding. And I want to call out White Fragility, specifically as written by a white woman. And there's a lot of conversation there around who are we listening to in these kind of times of crisis. So to me, this is a both and of both. This book can be problematic, and we should consider the ways that equity shows up in our reading. And I think particularly for white people who are really interested in trying to learn more but are really having a hard time understanding, this book was extremely helpful in kind of getting started. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions that have come in thus far.
Thank you. Wow. Wow. That you gave a lot of great information. And anyone has questions, feel free to send them to me in the chat. I'm happy to ask Becky. We got a lot of that was amazing. This was, oh yeah. No. And so we are going to field questions, but there's some things that I wanted to bring up. You talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion in your career. And I think that this was it had so many good nuggets in it for entrepreneurs, because those are the same things that you should be thinking of when you are creating a workforce. They're starting their own. We have a lot of our entrepreneur students that are on here listening, and this is perfect for them, because this is something you definitely should be thinking about as you start your new businesses, where they're right on the cusp of creating their business plans and about to opening up their new businesses. But of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that you should definitely be thinking about as you hire your employees, you manage your employees. So I really appreciate that you took the time to go through that, because that is something that should definitely be considered as an entrepreneur.
I would love to speak to something that you just said as well. And I didn't include this, but and I don't have the statistic off the top of my head, but there's several studies that have been done that show that the more diverse and inclusive a team is, the better your bottom line is, essentially. So companies are more profitable and have better outcomes the more diverse their teams are. And I can attest that as my own teams that I'm leading have been more diverse, we constantly are learning from each other and coming out with much more well-rounded plans, initiatives that really connect with a wide variety of people, and so it has paid off in leaps and bounds, just simply diversifying in little ways.
Yes, that's why I wanted to bring you on to speak, because I wanted students, and I wanted people of the college to see that entrepreneurship is not just starting business. That is just a misconception that, you're an entrepreneur when you start your business and you're innovative. But before I even became a professor, I thought of myself as an entrepreneur in my career, in corporate America, because I always came up with trying to come up with new ideas, trying to come up with um, new formulate new teams to take on new tasks, and that is having an entrepreneur mindset, and that can take you in your career and as well as starting your business. So that's why I wanted to definitely bring you, and I think that you really gave us a lot of information that was needed. So we have some questions coming in. One question is, you talked about reading, that you love to read. How helpful is that in your career? Reading with you reading so many books and stuff. How's that helpful, and how do you apply that into your career?
It is tremendously helpful. I have read 20 books so far this year. And that is not audiobooks yet, but just regular reading books. And I'll tell you, I like to dive into a subject and say, okay, I need to know about this and I need to learn about this. And I don't just want a couple of headlines or something like that. I want a nuanced understanding, because that nuance for me helps me connect many other pieces. I read an article a couple years ago that talked about how you could read 200 books in a year if you tried, and how you needed, and I was like, that is nuts. But they did the math and broke it out. And so essentially saying, learn to read in many different ways. So read on your phone, read in little bits, read hard books, read on iPads. And in those 10-15 minutes that you have in between meetings or on the bus or something like that, sit and read. And you can take in a lot of information. And so that has been honestly critical, because in an environment like I described with our community and the people within my social circles, not having that foundation of understanding equity work, I needed to learn it from somewhere. And it's not people of color's job to sit there and teach me what I don't know. So it really has been crucial for me being able to learn and go and dig into that information.
Awesome, awesome. Another question is, you talked about how you started the new initiative in your career. Um, the question asks, how do you go about being that innovator in your career? How do you take on that task to be an innovator?
I think I take that on by looking at like what, honestly, what is not working here? Like, what are the things that I avoid? What are the things that like are not enjoyable? And that's usually an indicator to me that like there needs to be some digging in here. So I have, yeah. So I'm just thinking there's different times in volunteer services or in equity work where I'm thinking to myself, well, this seems really frustrating. Maybe I should look at a process improvement here and really dive in and figure out what's going on here. And that often leads to innovation, and saying, okay, there's a new plan here, and let's refresh this and then move forward. And then it's not something that I don't want to do anymore because it's working right.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. So it was a two-part to that question that was asked. Did you find that your supervisor or boss was really open to your innovative ideas? And if you want to be innovative and you don't have someone that's like that, do you have any suggestions on, if you don't have a supportive supervisor?
Yes. So I have been so fortunate here at Memorial, and it's one of the things that I love about this organization is I've been really supported by my leaders, even our CEO of our whole health system, our senior leadership team, system leadership team. They have all been very supportive in learning and growing and innovating and coming up with new ideas and doing things, in an improved way. So I've been fortunate to be in that culture. The question though, for if you have challenges, it makes me think of change management and kind of the change management model. And you've really got to work to create buy-in and build that buy-in. And a lot of that comes from people not having their questions answered or not feeling heard. And so one very specific technique I'm thinking of, and you can Google this to read more about it, but it's called the 6 thinking hats. And if you're not familiar, it's basically like 6 buckets. And so you can take an idea and you can talk with someone through it and say, okay, what's everything that could go wrong here? What's everything that could go right here? What are things that that are undetermined that we need to find out more about? And you can go through these 6 specific buckets, and sometimes that helps bring everything out into the open that we're worried about and helps build that buy-in. So I think, and then additionally, I would just add, really thinking through what it is you're asking, what it is you're wanting to innovate, and what that gap is that you're seeing, and laying that out for your leaders, and recognizing that they don't have all the information. So you have to make explicit what seems implicit to you.
Awesome. Awesome. Another question asks, what did you find most challenging about starting your initiative? What did you find most challenging?
So I'm going to be very honest in this answer, which obviously I'm trying to be honest the whole time, but it's difficult coming from that like white female perspective, and trying to bridge, trying to build trust and credibility among people who have been marginalized, who have not had the advantages that I have had. And then additionally, trying to get folks, in other areas that don't have to think about or care about this work, helping get them to care about it. And so kind of bridging that gap. So it's something that I feel so strongly about and I'm really passionate about. And I felt like as I've dug in, the answers are all there. We just have to do the work to understand them, and listen to understand, and work to understand. But sometimes it can get difficult, of being kind of in the middle there and saying, hold on, no, how do we connect, these pieces together and bring people together more?
Awesome. Okay, here's another question we have. What are some things to look out for that can hinder innovative ideas? Specifically, what would you say are some of the most common barriers that hinder the development of a aspiring entrepreneur?
Yes. So I am thinking back to the point I made about anti-oppression work, of the abundance mindset. And we often fall into a scarcity mindset of saying, nope, this policy won't let us do that. This funding won't let us do that. So coming from that, like, no place, rather than how could we, instead of if we can. I had a thought and then I lost it, but yeah, I would say essentially thinking through that scarcity mindset and how that really creates barriers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can piggyback on that. Some of the most common barriers for entrepreneurs are, the first of all is taking the risk. It's hard for entrepreneurs to make that decision that they want to be they want to be an entrepreneur, but they don't want to let go of possibly, their job if they want to, or they're scared to risk money. So that is it's thinking about the risk, but taking small bites. Taking small steps to become an entrepreneur. You don't have to do it overnight. I promise you, it does not happen overnight. So taking a risk, and also building a network. And you talked about that, how you had mentors all around you that
Yeah.
helped you to develop in your career. And having a mentor as an entrepreneur is just as important as well. Having someone to mentor you, and someone who's been where you want to go, and having that help, and being able to get feedback. And so those things that's one of the barriers, that some people jump in and they don't have anyone to talk to. They don't know, they don't have anyone to hold their hand, and help them go through these things and mentor them, like you said, in your career. So definitely reaching out and finding a mentor. And that is one of the reasons why, in the entrepreneur pathway that we started, that we created a mentorship program, and we're going to be matching our mentors with our entrepreneurship students. So definitely mentors.
That's so critical. And I
Yeah.
also, I remembered the other point I was going to make. I was like, hold on, I got to write it down real quick. Reflect on what are self-imposed rules. And so a lot of times in our work or our businesses, we may make something a rule in our mind, but it's not actually a rule. And so digging into, where does this come from? And never being afraid of change, being always open to that.
That's great. Never being afraid of change. That's a big one in in your careers. If you're an innovator or entrepreneur in your career, also as a business owner, never being afraid of change, because change is constant, and something that's one thing that's always going to be is change is constant. So that was great. That's great. Um, Another question we have is, what have you had any failures, and how did you go about going through those failures and learning from them?
Yes. Okay. The first thing that pops into my head, which I try to just laugh at now because it was painful. We had an event for one of our volunteer groups when I was leading the volunteer program, and we had done some strategic planning with them. There was some obvious like issues with engagement and just people's ability to really have capacity to do this particular volunteer work that we had set up. And we were having our annual meeting for the event, and we had raised some concerns about like, should we do this, like, or what's going on. I think like 4 members of the volunteer group came. So we had several senior leaders there to show their support of the volunteer program. But so it's like the perfect example of like throwing a party that no one comes to. And for someone who is a connector, that was a particularly painful experience for me. I've had many other failures. We have kind of a joke among people who know me that 95% of the work I do is outstanding, and then the other 5% I just really bomb. So we see in dominant cultural norms when thinking of like EDI work, we see this idea of perfectionism just being pervasive. And culturally, many of us just hold so tightly to this need for perfectionism, and that we have to do everything right and just so. And another one of the things that Mitch, my mentor, really instilled in me was it's okay to fail, just fail fast. And so I think, yeah, just opening up that it's okay to have mistakes. It's okay to miss, the goal sometimes. The key though is going back and making changes, adjusting, and continuing the work. You still stay in it. You don't give up. So for that example with the party, we ended that, we went back and had some additional crucial conversations that said, hey, like, this is what we were talking about, that like the engagement doesn't seem to be there. And now we have, clear evidence to kind of show some of the issues that we have. And obviously there was more detail and things involved, but yeah, just going back and saying, all right, like, let's analyze this. Let's review what we could have done differently and done better. And we try again. And that's okay. It's okay.
Awesome. I love that. Fail fast. I like that. Fail fast. That's going to conclude everything. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to speak to our students in our community about your career and your entrepreneur journey within your career, and being an innovator, and someone who takes initiatives and risk and making that leap to learn new things and just diving in. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone for attending our Entrepreneur Speaker Series. Our last speaker for this series is October 6th, and you can register on ess.highlands.edu. Also, October 15th, many of our speakers will be coming back for a speaker panel, including Becky for our Charge into Leadership conference that's going to be on Cartersville campus. That's October 15th. I had a comment for our last speaker that someone said, hey, I want to be able to talk to these entrepreneurs and mingle with them. And hey, well, guess what? This is your opportunity to actually meet the entrepreneurs from our past speaker panels. We're bringing back pretty much all of them. So all your favorites, they're all coming back for a panel. And that is for the leadership conference, October 15th. If you are a student, you should have seen the registration link come through from Clifton Puckett. It is free. You get free food, breakfast and lunch, a t-shirt. I mean, what else and see entrepreneurs, what else could you possibly want after that? It's open for registration. And again, thank everyone for attending, and hopefully I will see you all on our next Entrepreneur Speaker Series, the last one on October the 6th. I hope everyone has an amazing day, and thank you again. Bye-bye.